All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's tutorial on website accessibility. Today we're going to be talking about ADA compliance when it comes to our websites. So we'll be going over what web accessibility is, areas that you're going to need to pay attention to when you're developing your site, and I will be providing you with some additional resources that you'll be able to use in order to ensure that your website is accessible and ADA compliant. Now, before we get started, I just want to note that ADA compliance guidelines for websites evolve with technology and change on a regular basis. This presentation is meant as a starting place for libraries, not as an authoritative guide or legal advice. Libraries are solely responsible for ensuring they meet all ADA guidelines, whether that be in their physical structures or online. So let's go ahead and kick off today's tutorial with talking about what is website accessibility. Website accessibility refers to the capacity of a website to be easily understood and navigated by individuals of varying abilities. The best way we can think about this is through an example of what we use on our website. So let's start with photos. So when we use photos on our website, it's oftentimes to convey information. Now, some patrons will be able to see that photo, but for patrons who can't, they might not be able to understand the information you're trying to convey through that photo. So we have to find a way to provide them with that exact same information that we're providing through an image. Why is web accessibility important? Well, first of all, it's providing equal access to all of your patrons. The CDC estimates that 62 million Americans are living with a disability. That's 1 in 4 Americans. When our websites are not compliant, we are not providing equal access to all patrons. The other reason it's important is it's required by law. As more court cases involving web accessibility appear, courts are upholding that the Americans with Disability Act requires businesses to make reasonable accommodations online in addition to their physical spaces. Not making your website accessible opens your organization up to liabilities. So we know what web accessibility is and why it's important. So let's talk about the criteria for accessibility. There's 4 criteria that we need to think of as we begin to build our websites and make sure they're accessible. The first being that your website needs to be perceivable. So users should be able to perceive the information. Content can't be invisible to their senses. So we can think about the photo example again. We need to be able to make sure that patrons that can't see images have another way of understanding the information you're trying to convey through that image. Your website also needs to be operable. The interface can't require an interaction in which a user cannot perform. So, if a user cannot use a mouse because of a physical disability, then they need to be able to have an alternative of how they can navigate your site without a mouse. Your website also needs to be understandable. Users should be able to easily understand all information and the operation of your interface. This takes good coordination on your part as you lay out your site. You want to make sure that your language is, not too complicated so that people of varying education levels are able to easily understand what you're trying to convey on your site. Your website also needs to be robust. Your content must evolve with the advancement of changing technologies. Now, when you're using the NCLS template, this theme is already accessibility ready. So when the theme makes updates, those updates should allow for your any accessibility functions of that theme should be updated to stay in check with advancing technology. So now let's talk about ways that we can make our sites ADA compliant. First, let's talk about navigation. So site visitors should be able to navigate your website using the tab function on their keyboard, as well as arrows to navigate up and down a page. You will find that with the NCLS theme that this function is already set up for your theme. In addition to being able to tab on that site, a skip to content function should be available. And here I've taken a screenshot and you can see that the NCLS theme does allow for skip to content. Skip to content is important because it allows a visitor to skip tabbing through the main menu bar on every page. They can go straight to the information that they would like to see. Next is links. Links should also alert a visitor on your site where a link will take them instead of using a phrase like link or click here. So I've provided an example for you. So something you don't want to do is write click here to visit the College of Pharmacy homepage. It doesn't really tell someone where they need to go if they aren't able to see where a link is. Instead, what you want to do is write visit the College of Pharmacy homepage so that they know exactly where they're going. Let's talk about images now. So all images, unless it's purely decorative, should include alt text so that a visitor using a screen reader will be able to understand what the image is conveying. So here we have an image of a baseball game. So we want to be descriptive with our text to show relationship to the information around it. And while we don't have that, I'm going to show you a good way to describe an image versus a bad way to do it. So bad alt text would be something like baseball player hitting a ball at a baseball field. There's no context to the situation. There's no description. There's no specificity to this. So we wouldn't consider this good alt text. Good alt text would be something like David Ortiz of the Boston Red Sox batting from home plate at Fenway Park. Alt text, it should always be descriptive, it should always be specific, and you should never begin any alt text with image of or picture of. Now let's talk about graphics, tables, and documents. Graphics such as infographics should either have a long description for an image or they should provide a text-based alternative that accurately conveys information for users that aren't able to see graphics well. If you're using documents for things like meeting minutes, documents can be linked and uploaded as PDFs, but it should also be offered as text-based documents so that patrons that are using readers will be able to access the information that you're uploading to your site as well. Finally, tables. Tables should never be used for decorative or layout purposes. If a table is being used to convey important data, you will need to do some HTML markup that indicates header cells and data cells and defines their relationships. So for those that are uncomfortable with coding and want to stay away from that, I would just steer far away from using tables on your site since there's really no way even using WordPress and the block editor that you can make a table without having to do some HTML in order to mark what are header cells and what are data cells. Videos and audio. So videos and audio, they need closed captioning on a video and alt text as well. And then any audio should have a transcript along with it. If not, the material is not accessible to those who have limited vision or hearing. Color and contrast is also something that is really important. Color should never be the only cue to indicate categories, urgency, or any pertinent knowledge on your site. Color schemes must also be contrasted enough that people with vision impairments will be able to discern the text. So that means that if you're using light colors, you need to contrast that with really dark colors or black. Or if you're using really dark colors, you need to contrast them with really light colors or white. At the bottom, you'll see an example of poor contrast. The sentence that I've written there is sort of hard to discern. It takes a while for your eyes to adjust, if they can, to read exactly what that sentence says. Next, fonts and text layouts. A site's text should be formatted to a size that is easily readable without resizing. In addition, if your text needs to be enlarged, it needs to keep the integrity of the site's layout. So we're lucky in the sense that using WordPress, enlarging a site normally means that with WordPress, it will enlarge in a way that it doesn't lose the entire layout of the site. But when you are laying out your text on a page, things that you will want to remember is that body text should be around 12 to 16 point font and headers should be around 16 to 18 point font. And both the header and paragraph functions are set at acceptable point fonts for each function. In addition to making sure that your text is readable, you want to make sure that all pages are consistent in their use of headers for best clarity. All right, and then finally, there are some resources that are available to you for website compliance. So the first is called the Wave tool. The Wave tool is a site that you can go to and you can plug in your individual pages for your website to look and see how they're performing and if they have any accessibility issues. There's also a quick reference guide that I've included, as well as some web accessibility tutorials that you can take a look at. Now, there is another way that you can ensure that your website is compliant, or if it's been a couple years after developing your website and using all of these tips, that you might want to have it checked and make sure that something isn't out of compliance. So one thing that you can do is contact a web firm that perform web audits or can help you troubleshoot more complex ADA compliance issues. This will cost money. It really truly varies on the complexity of your site and the web firm you're working with. So it's an opportunity that's available for you. And if you are, uncomfortable with website compliance, this might be a route for you to give you assurance that your website is completely ADA compliant. So before we leave today's tutorial, I just want to leave you with one tip that I think is really important, and that is think about accessibility now, not later. We're in the beginning phases of building our WordPress sites, and it's really important that we begin thinking about accessibility as we develop our site and not later. It is much more tedious to have to go back and fix all of these things because they weren't built with accessibility in mind, as opposed to building it from the bottom up with accessibility in mind. So think about these things now, go ahead and review the video, and then use those resources to make sure that you have a good grasp. We'll also talk about some of these accessibility issues in our classes and go over them more hands-on and show you how they function when we're building our sites on WordPress. But that is everything for today's tutorial on web accessibility. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.